Hey guys, Robert here, and today I have a very special guest with me. Met him at Motor City Comic Con. He's very prolific, a mainstay, in my opinion, of '90s Marvel, Mr. Terry Kavanagh.
Hello, nice to
And,
be here.
yep, thank you so much for coming on. It's an honor. And I was first want to know is how did you get started in comics?
When I got out of school originally, I worked for a construction company. I started as a truck driver. I was promoted to estimator, salesman. Terrible, horrible job. Acoustical ceiling tiles, 0 stars. Do not recommend.
Are they still around?
Eventually, I quit and I'd saved up some money. I had a relatively inexpensive apartment in New York, so I'd saved up some money. I went and traveled around Europe, came back, had no money left, no job, but a friend of mine from high school, we had been in a comic book club together in high school, was working at Marvel at that point as an assistant editor, Michael Higgins. And I believe he was an assistant editor on the Fantastic Four family of titles. They started giving me work, letters page work. It was $25 a page. I happened to be at the office one day delivering some letters pages when Ralph Macchio's assistant called in and said he had mono and was going to be out for 6 months. So Ralph had no assistant. So Michael Higgins walked me into his office and said, "Here, Terry can do the job." And Ralph, like many of us comic book people, were lazy enough to not look a gift horse in the mouth. And Ralph said, "Yeah, sure. Come on, start tomorrow." And I came in, I did that for a while. I got to know a lot of the Marvel people because Ralph was also notorious. I love Ralph. He was a great guy. Still is a great guy. He really didn't come into the office till 11, 12, 1 some days. So I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing when I was there for hours in the morning. So I got a lot of help from other people, from, Bob Harris, Howard Mackey, people like that. When Ralph's assistant came back on staff, now at that point, I knew a lot of people at Marvel. They made work for me. They made me the submissions editor. I did that for a while, sharing an office with Elliot Brown and Bob Harris. And then when Ann Nesenti's assistant, Pat Blevins, was leaving staff, Bob walked me into Ann's office and said, "Yeah, Terry can be your new assistant editor." And Ann, like Ralph, said, "Okay, sure, you start tomorrow." And so I started then. That was really my first official position there, I would say, as assistant editor on the X-Men books under Anderson.
Nice. And then obviously that was as an editor. So what was your first writing gig? I got so many of them here, but
if I remember correctly, it was Kickers Inc.
One sec. Sorry. You can just keep talking. I just got a phone. Hold on.
Yep. It was Kickers Inc. I don't remember what issue it was, but this was a New Universe title. The New Universe was notoriously difficult to survive. It was the brainchild of Jim Shooter, who envisioned it more as the world outside your window, which was a little problematic for comic book people. We were used to writing and drawing and creating these very bombastic, larger-than-life stories, which it was just very hard to live up to what Jim's vision of the New Universe should be. So a lot of people lost their jobs over that, or quit their jobs over those New Universe titles. And when I believe Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz were the creators of Kickers Inc.
Sorry about that.
No problem. When Tom left the book, Carl Potts, again, I believe, was the editor. And I'm sure I was the very last person on earth that he tried. I had never written anything. I might have written a couple of Animax shorts for the toys at that point. I'm not 100% sure. But everybody he asked, I'm sure, said no, because the New Universe was a fast ticket out the door of Marvel.
Yeah, I'm aware of the new it was Jim Shooter's big idea to celebrate Marvel's anniversary at that point, and then by that point, I've met Jim Shooter, nice guy and everything, but I'm aware about how the climate of him around him at that point. So,
yes, Jim did a lot of amazing things for the comic book industry, getting creator rights, getting rates raised to a more livable wage. I learned a lot while Jim was editor-in-chief there. I learned from Ann Nesenti, who was my direct boss as editor. I learned from Jim. I learned from everybody at Marvel learned from everybody else.
Right.
But that was a fast ticket out the door to take on one of the new universe titles. In fact, I believe that's how Michael Higgins lost his job. He was editor of a few of those titles and wasn't living up to Jim's vision.
Right.
So I took it on because I guess I was too stupid to be worried about the future. I'm not sure. And I'm not a sports guy, but it was a fun title. It was great working with the art teams there. It was great working with Carl Potts. I'm not sure how long I would have survived at Marvel if Jim hadn't been let go around that time, or I wasn't living up to his expectations.
Understandable. But obviously, you are, as you and I talked about before we got started, some of the things you're best known for are your time on Spider-Man, stuff with Iron Man with the cross thing, and all that. And well, let's just start with Spider-Man first.
Okay. Dive right into the controversy, why don't we?
Yeah, let's just dive right into it. Well, let's actually talk about one that is still well regarded, at least as far as the image of it.
Yes.
Web of Spider-Man number 100 was the spider armor.
Yes.
The first spider armor. The fact they keep on bringing back the armor and everything. Like, did you ever expect it to be such a long stay?
No, it was meant to be a one-off to celebrate the anniversary issue of Spider-Man and do a holographic cover and maybe have a sort of different look to him, but it was not meant to survive that issue at all. I am constantly surprised at how popular it became, and I only really know this from doing conventions and people coming up and telling me that it's a popular armor in some of the games, etc. I'm not a gamer. My son was and is a gamer, but he was not into superheroes because, dad did it, so it couldn't be cool. So he played all kinds of different games, but it apparently had legs, this armor.
Yeah.
And I have an action figure of it.
Oh, nice.
Right here.
Oh, nice.
So I am pleasantly surprised by the legs it had.
And it's always considered armor 1 because they would do other armors, but this is always considered the first one, and thus once you have follow-ups, I'm pretty sure that makes this one stick even more so because of that.
I would agree with you. And Alex Saviuk did a great job.
Oh yeah,
in that armor, he really did.
It is a great armor. Just looking at it right here, and that cover, of course, is pretty classic too.
Yep.
But of course, then there's stuff like Maximum Carnage, for example. Now, I know I talked about this at the convention, but of course we're talking about it here. Was it really known as Maximum Garbage around even the writers, or is that kind of a...
Not to my knowledge. I don't remember that at all. I would say we were aware that it was possibly overloaded with characters and story, which is a thing.
I loved it both because of the video game and I just like the story. Even if it does feel a little bloated, but for the most part, it's a good story overall still.
Again, I'm super surprised at conventions when people come up and say they loved it. I think a lot of it has to do with the age people were when they were reading certain titles or certain storylines, when it sticks with them. What I remember enjoying about it was the opportunity to write characters like Cloak and Dagger, Iron Fist, people that didn't necessarily, or street level heroes, but didn't necessarily always interact that much with Peter or Spider-Man. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yep, and it gave us stuff like you brought back the Spider Doppelganger. This was when we were introduced to Shriek and all that. I mean, what was it like in the writer's room and everything coming up with the ideas for this? I mean, like
we had so much fun. Everybody at that time period working on staff was a ton of fun. Working on the books, it was all people who would have done what they were doing for free. We all had a passion for this.
Right.
I mean, we didn't tell them we would do it for free because
obviously
for free. We definitely would have done it for the free comic books.
Right.
But we had a ton of fun and we played off each other. We would have, conferences on the Spider-Man titles specifically because the X-Men titles and the Spider-Man titles did these group conferences so that the writers and artists could throw stuff out and see what each other was responsive to or what aspects of a story we wanted to take on for our particular titles. We just really enjoyed it. We fed off each other. One of the best things about the comic book medium is the collaborative aspect of it. It's really, even as a writer, I never quite faced a blank page. I always had the previous issue to pick up off of. Hopefully, even if I just came on a title, there were threads dangling from the previous creators, or I could just get on the phone with the artists and say, what do you feel like drawing this month? And if they said, I don't know, water, I'd be like, all right, let's do it. Spider-Man meets Namor, Atlantis storyline. I don't particularly remember doing anything like that, but that was the idea. Or they would even throw out a character. I've always wanted to draw Werewolf by Night. Okay, let's throw Werewolf by Night into the next issues. You still had to make it work with the direction your book was going. And there were certain things that didn't fit with certain characters. Spider-Man was never a good fit for supernatural storylines or anything like that. He was a more grounded, urban type hero. And if they said they wanted to draw, the Grand Canyon, well, there are not a lot of tall buildings around there for Spider-Man to swing around. So you had to make it work with the character. The character always, always, always came first.
Exactly. And I miss what comics like. I know the Superman office, at DC, they were one of the first to really, I think, get that going, weren't they? Where, the whole collaborative, like everyone meets up and it just the never-ending battle, they called it. And was that something that Marvel was taking notes from, or was that just happenstance?
That's hard for me to answer. I know a lot of the people who were working at DC at that point, and I knew them then, but we didn't necessarily talk about what their storytelling approach was compared to ours. We mostly just drank when we got together. So that was the biggest draw for all of us. But I do know that I might as well get to the Clone Saga.
We'll be getting to that too.
I know it's coming. But I do know that the story out there is that we did the Clone Saga as a response to the death of Superman storyline, that it got all that. That, to my knowledge, I don't remember that at all. I think
those who say that are the ones who weren't aware of stuff like the Spider, the death of Peter's parent. It was like, you guys, from what I understand, there's that blog, Life of Riley or whatever, where one of the editors. Yep. He's talked about how basically it was more of a case where you guys were kind of riding into a corner almost. Like the way you were doing with Peter was like, let's try and do something to shake it up and bring back some livelihood, because we were getting too dark after after some of those stories.
I will tell you, I take some issue with Glenn's Life of Riley. It is not necessarily the way I remember it.
I think he's the one who said maximum garbage. I think that's where I got it from.
That said, Glenn may remember it better than me, for all I know. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
But Howard Mackey and I are very close, and he was on the books as well, and we've discussed this to death, the whole Clone Saga and how it came about. Really, what happened was we had written ourselves into a corner. As we aged and got married and had kids and had mortgages, we sort of brought Peter into that corner. He and Mary Jane had gotten married at Shea Stadium. We were all at the wedding. It was a lot of fun, but this is a terrible thing to say, but the sexual tension really sort of went out of that relationship once they got married, as a lot of married people could probably attest to.
No, boy, and it did feel, I'm not saying it's about your writing, I'm just saying overall, it always felt like, with some exceptions, a lot of times the writing for MJ was all like, oh, Peter's is out there, I'm worried about him. Yes. It's like, but yeah, it seemed to be like a trapping that she fell into.
Yeah, very much so. So what happened was, and this was not a mandate to directly from editorial to solve this problem, right, but it was one we were sort of all aware of. We're like, okay, he's graduated school, he's married to the most beautiful woman in town, they have a penthouse apartment, he's a teacher now. Literally none of these things would our core audience, which were, you know, teenagers, be able to identify with at all. There were certainly fans that had also evolved into the same place, and they didn't mind reading about that, but we wanted to be bringing in newer readers as well. And I very fondly remembered the original introduction of the clone that Jerry Conway had done with the Jackal when I was younger. And I particularly enjoyed that storyline. I could never have articulated this way at the time, but I particularly enjoyed that storyline because a clone of Peter Parker is a good guy. So it was two good guys in a bad situation. It wasn't a bad guy versus a good guy. It wasn't that black and white. There was rooting value for both sides. And then I distinctly remembered how it ended, which was that they had this fight, and then the clone theoretically was killed and thrown down a smokestack, as if there is a fire at the bottom of a smokestack head, which there is not.
No.
And Peter,
I'm sure Jerry didn't realize that at the time. I bet you he probably thought, oh, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, and it didn't matter. It was just getting this character out of the way. We were done. It was a 2-issue story arc, I think, and it was done and over with.
Yeah.
And
it was a couple of issues. I remember the overall story of it, but the particular stuff with the clone was 2 issues. But everyone wraps in the entire stuff from the moment the Jackal was revealed all the way to the end of it, which really was an arc. So
but the clone was the two issues, if I remember correctly. And I distinctly remember the ending was Peter swinging across town with the genetic results from Kurt Connors, establishing whether he was the clone or the real.
He didn't even look at it. He never even looked at it.
He decided that his love for Mary Jane was so real, only a human being could feel that way. And he tore it up and threw it away. And that, I remember, sort of stunning me when I was younger, thinking, I don't know, I would have at least looked at it. I really but maybe the downside.
It's Peter, though. It's Peter. He's going to want an excuse to not look at it.
And in my mind, he was afraid it was going to be bad news, that he was the clone. And that's what he didn't really want to find out. So he tore it up, he threw it away. And then years later, when we were in this position of having written Peter away from our core audience, that storyline came rushing back to me. And I thought, what if? Really, what if? And I'll tell you, when I first pitched it, it was at Howard Mackey's insistence. We would talk at 2 a.m. all the time, as we were both writing 2 different Spider-Man books. And again, we were close friends. We still are. And they were asking for ideas for the next big event. Danny Fingeroth was the editor, and I was relatively new to the book, so I was sort of quiet. And Howard said, "Well, Terry's got an idea." And I'm like, oh, thanks, Howard. And as soon as I started pitching it, saying, well, you know, this clone story, some of the people in the room remembered it, some didn't. We bring them back. And I remember Mark DeMattis shot it down immediately and said, no, we just had Peter's parents come back, and then it turned out they were LMDs, they were fakes, so it'd just be a rehash of that. And that's when I said, well, no. In this case, the one who comes back who's single and unmarried will turn out to be the real one at the end of the story arc. And that got DeMattis and everybody in the room so excited about it. And Fingeroth was scared. As the editor, he was very nervous about it. And
I mean, rightfully so. I can see why.
Of course. And that was his job, was to shepherd these characters. Our job was to make as exciting a story as we could. He needed to make sure these characters, you know, ran the distance.
Exactly.
So he said, all right, I'm going to have to bring the editor-in-chief, Tom DeFalco, in tomorrow. And we made him swear that he wouldn't tell Tom ahead of time the idea. We wanted to pitch it to Tom because we knew Danny was going to say, all right, Tom, I don't think you're going to like this idea, but, you know, and it wouldn't be.
And then he's a Spider-Man, Tom's a Spider-Man writer. He should hear from the other writers.
Exactly. And the artists were into it too. Everybody in the room was so into it. So we ended up, he did end up telling Tom DeFalco. So Tom came in with all his reasons to shut down the storyline. And I remember one of the things he said is, it'll be just like that Dallas season where it turned out it was a dream and Bobby hadn't died. And I remember saying, no, it's not like that at all. It's not like that at all. Everything that happened to the character happened to the character, and everything that happened to the other character happened to them. It was mistaken identity. It was just who they were. And to Tom's credit, he listened, he heard all that, but mostly what he responded to was watching the writers and artists, and he'll tell you this in interviews, jumping up on the table and
excitement. He read the room, in other words. Yes, he read the room.
And literally security, we were at a hotel doing this.
Oh no.
And security showed up and said, what the hell's going on in here? Because everybody was yelling and screaming. We were all yelling in a good, positive way because we were all, the ideas were flowing of, we'd have, you know, the real first meeting with Venom, and you get these first meetings with all these supervillains again that they hadn't, you know, the original Spider-Man knew Doc Ock and all that. Anyway, and as Tom has said since then, you know, he figured, all right, if the creators are this excited about this storyline, the readers are going to be as well. And so we did it. And the intent was it was going to be, Howard and I disagree on this a little bit. I sort of remember that it was going to be, I think, 5 months and the 5 titles. So it'd be 25 issues. And the end was going to be that Ben Reilly was the real Spider-Man. He would take on the identity of Peter Parker, take back the identity of Peter Parker, and the existing Peter would go off into the sunset with Mary Jane with a happy ending because Mary Jane would reveal she was pregnant. And very organic to Peter's character. Peter was going to decide with great power comes great responsibility, and my responsibility now is to my family, is to my wife and child, and I can leave it confidently in the hands of the original Spider-Man. So that was the intent. I think Howard thinks it was going to be 4 months and 5 titles. So it's just a difference of 5 issues that he sort of thinks.
Now, was it always planned to have a back door to get out in case things didn't go well, or no back door, nothing like that? In
fact, we did our best to make sure there was no back door, because you always know that the next generation of writers is going to want to do something. Again, Tom DeFalco remembers that very differently. He says the intent was to always have Peter Parker back as the.
That's what I keep hearing too.
It's absolutely not true, and I've told that to Tom's face, and he's like, "Well, you may think that, but I was the boss."
I bet you. And in other words, that tells me that was in the back of my mind. I would have told you guys when we got closer to the end. But then, of course, you had the stuff with the comic crash, and then the edit. Basically, if I understand, marketing started telling editorial what to do, and that's what
we had at least doubled the sales, if not more, on those titles during.
People wanted to know.
It directly led to the Age of Apocalypse out of the X-Men office, because they looked at what was going on at that event, and it had, for the first time in a long time, the Spider-Man sales had bypassed the X-Men sales. So Bob Harris, who was the editor of the X-Men titles, like, well, we got to do something to get back our first place. And so the marketing salespeople were literally coming into the offices every other day saying, you can't end this storyline. You can't. The sales are still up. They're still going up. You can't end it. And I left the books halfway through. And I remember very specifically, it was a mutual thing between the editor and myself. It wasn't just my decision, but I remember walking into his office and there was a cover for one of the Spider-Man titles, Send in the Clones, and it was like 100 clones.
That was Maximum. That was for the Clonage one or something. That was supposed to be the ending of the story, and it ended up they gave it to some other writer, and turns out he ended in a way that basically kept it going and all that. It was like, what?
Yes. Well, that Send in the Clones issue sort of put me over the edge because I looked and I said, Danny, we've spent months establishing this Ben Reilly character as a real unique individual, even though he's a clone of Spider-Man. Now, if there's hundreds of others out there, it just dilutes the whole concept of the storyline of the character.
You had Spider Side, you had Kane.
Yep. Well, Kane, we had agreed on from the beginning. He was going to be the failed initial clone. He was going to be a villain. But we actually, almost all of the creators enjoyed writing him so much. It was a natural
I like
thing
Kane.
for him to evolve.
That's the funny thing about the Clone Saga. The stuff that works is the stuff people remember.
Yep.
The stuff that didn't work, there's a reason why it's not brought up anymore.
Exactly. So, that went on for a long time. And it really was when Bob Harris became editor-in-chief that he decided to undo it. But I think that was 2.5 years into the Clone Saga, at least at that point. And Bob decided it was going to go back to the other
original. Kill off the baby, kill off Ben. Oh, it's not going to be Harry, it's going to be Norman.
Yes. And I think that was a good idea. I think Norman behind it was a very interesting idea because that really is Peter's arch.
Not in the short term, but in the long term, I think it did. In the short term, it probably felt like, but lately he's still around. I mean, look at what's been going on with him currently now. Now we're actually having a Norman that's been cured of his sins.
Yep.
And it's interesting seeing something fresh with the character you could never do before.
Absolutely. Yep.
But then eventually you went on to Iron Man and, for the looks of things, Avengers.
Yep.
And that would lead into, you out from one controversy into another with The Crossing.
Yeah, I honestly I understand the controversy over the Clone Saga, although now, again, it's so rewarding to me to be at conventions and have people come up to me and say, Ben Reilly was my Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah. That's why people are so pissed off. That's why people are so pissed off at how Marvel lately are tainting the character to the point where editorials saying stupid stuff like, if we're having Miles, we can't have another good Spider-Man, so Ben's going to do it. It's like, what sense does that make?
Yeah. And it's a betrayal to fans at a certain point. We were never going to say that when we revealed that Ben was the real one and Peter was the clone, we were never going to say he was less heroic.
Yeah.
Peter was less heroic for that. In fact, it was more so in some ways. We had a lot of plans on how best to tell that story. We never got to do our beginning, middle, and end. We got to our beginning and then our middle that just got dragged on and on and on.
Yep.
And then an end was sort of tacked on.
I mean, I do like the ending, but I think those things, the writers, Howard and
DeMatteis, yeah, and
I forgot the other one was
Todd.
Todd Dzango. Yeah.
Yep. So, and they did a great job with it. That's fine. But I guess I'm stalling and trying not to get to
actually before the Crossing, Planet of the Symbiotes. Where did that idea come from?
I have no idea.
Yeah, because I see your name according to some of them, so that's why I was asking about that.
I have no memory of that whatsoever.
All right, fair enough. I guess the idea is just, Venom's an alien. Where are the rest of them?
Yeah. Oh, that's fair. That's a good starting point for it.
Yep. Okay, but so with The Crossing, whose idea was it?
Again, that was a group effort. I was writing the Avengers titles with Bob Harris at that point. Mm-hmm. And since Bob was the group editor of the X-Men titles, he had a sort of X-Men mentality. And a lot of people have said about it, it looked like we were trying to turn the Avengers into the X-Men between the changes in their costumes, the approach we went about. There were issues of them just swimming in the pool that were reminiscent of the old X-Men baseball games that Claremont would write. And there's probably some truth to that. I think that was just how Bob's mind worked and his instinct. But it was never said out loud, let's try and make the Avengers more X-Men. The Avengers were that was my favorite title growing up. I loved the Avengers. And that was probably true of Bob. That was probably true of everyone who worked on those titles. And then we had Mike Diodato, who had a very super realistic style.
Still does, yeah.
Yeah, that lent us to doing a little more shadowy, dark stuff. And, you know, it was named The Crossing, but there was no plan to change the world with that or change the Avengers world with that. It did develop the plan to bring in a younger Tony Stark, because again, there was this question of this super successful billionaire inventor with facial hair, you know, and how could our younger audience really identify with that?
And this is before RDJ. We have to remember, this is before RDJ made him one of the most popular. Absolutely. He was never, he was, with the exception of the Leighton era and all that, you know, and the Michelini era. But even then, that's what got more people recognizing him, but it still didn't launch him into the stratosphere or anything.
No, not at all. And I will say that doing Teen Tony, that was meant to be temporary. That was never permanent. We weren't.
I never heard that part.
Yeah, we were never. The plan was never to sideline our Tony forever, but it was a case of when he turned out to be an unwilling sleeper agent for Kang. He had done something horrible, which was, you know, shoot the Wasp and kill Gorilla, I think. We were going to have to put him aside for a little while, the same way that was done with Jean Grey when, as the Phoenix, you know, killed 1 billion asparagus people on the asparagus.
Yeah, whatever, yeah. I remember that.
So that was meant to be, it was pretty much meant to be temporary. If it had worked super successfully, we could have stuck with Teen Tony forever, but that led directly into the Image guys taking over those books
and then Kurt Busiek and Mark Waid coming on and then saying, oh, they remerged or whatever.
Yes.
But so it was always meant to be temporary. That's interesting. That's the first I've heard of that one. I mean, I didn't hear about Teen Tony being permanent either. I just never heard one way or the other.
In my mind, and I know Nel Yomtov was the editor of Iron Man at that point, I distinctly remember us discussing, let's try this and see. You know, that's what a lot of comic book stuff is. Let's throw some stuff at the wall, make sure we are true to the characters.
That's what I miss so much. I miss that so much these days. It's like throw stuff to the wall. But does it fit the character? Who cares? That's the only book you're on.
Yeah, that's not what you should be doing.
No.
If you've always loved Batman and suddenly you're the writer of Superman, you should not be writing Superman like Batman. Even if that was his dream.
Exactly. You got to toughen up and maybe hope you'll get Batman if you do well in Superman. Yes. Don't try and be like, "Rrr."
Or if you can't make Superman work, and I can understand that, if you can't make Superman work because he's just not a character that resonates with you, don't be on that book.
Yeah,
there are
exactly.
other books that will work for you.
Or here's something else. Have it be, unless you're on the main Superman book, if you're one of the ancillary books, focus on another character. Just make sure you have Superman appear in it.
Yep.
And then focus on Gangbuster.
Yeah.
And then have Superman just still be a part of it. So it's a story, but you can focus on Gangbuster because that's closest to Batman he has.
That's true.
But now the idea though of Tony being, it seems from what I understand, a lot of people's problems stem from how far back it was. And that was one of the things that Kurt Busiek had tweaked during his Avengers Forever. He never said he was a sleeper cell. It was that it happened a lot sooner than what you guys had done. What was the decision to be that far back in his history?
I honestly don't remember what time period we decided it had happened.
It was since the beginning, Avengers #1.
Okay. I do know that.
Oh, no, sorry. Their first Kang fight. Their first encounter with Kang is how far back it was.
Sense. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
I do know that it was established at some point to us, to the creators, when it had happened, but I just don't remember what we had settled on. That makes total sense, what you just said.
Yeah, it was as far back as when Kang first met him, he decided, okay, I'll turn him into I'll make him a sleeper cell. And I think that's where a lot of people's problems were. Whereas Kurt then retconned it to being as far back as Operation Galactic Storm.
Okay.
which I think people were, that was a better pill to swallow than that far back.
Yeah.
It just feels like, but it's the whole idea of, well, they've dealt with him many times since. I'm just saying this from what I've been hearing. For me,
yep.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, for me, it's still an interesting story overall. I mean, I got the omnibus.
I love seeing that.
One of the 90s most notorious narratives.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a 90s declaration right there with the alliteration.
It really is. I have never understood why that story was so controversial. It was one story arc. It really was. But it did, comic book fans are passionate.
It's because I think people like to connect and say, oh, it's what led to Onslaught, when I'm pretty sure Onslaught and the Heroes Reborn, wasn't that already in how far after Crossing was that it was Heroes Reborn in the works? It couldn't have been that much longer.
Yeah, I can't tell you that, but right, because I only wrote, I don't know how many issues of Teen Spider-Man before Heroes Reborn happened. So
I mean, Teen Tony,
Teen Tony, sorry. And while I was doing Teen Tony, the Onslaught story must have been happening at that point already in the X-Men book.
Oh yeah, because this one went up to Avengers 396-ish. No, not 396, 395, and then about 400 is around the time of Onslaught. So that was like 5 months away from Onslaught. So that was probably already like they probably fired the shot it, got it all started the moment you wrapped up.
Yeah.
So,
I honestly don't even remember that we planned the Crossing as an event storyline. It was just what the story we were going to tell in the Avengers for a while. I don't remember it being planned as an event, but I guess that's when marketing.
Well, you have Iron Man 325 mixing into it, so I think that kind of felt like a fitting, point.
Yeah. And then marketing steps in and they decide what's an event and what's not.
Right, exactly. Also during all this, you also had worked on with the Malibu, the Ultraverse, the All New Exiles, which, from what you said, you don't remember this story that much, but you have Juggernaut here being on this team, and from what you said, this was you just remember having a lot of fun working on this.
I had a lot of fun working on this. I liked the New Blood characters and I liked the combination of that and the characters I was already familiar with. The New Blood characters, in a way, seemed more of a blank slate for me. They weren't. They had been established and been around for a while. But in my mind, I knew a little less about them. So I felt like I could do more with them than I could with characters like Juggernaut and those characters who I knew were going to have to return to the Marvel Universe and the X-Men books, so I wouldn't be allowed to mess too much with their status quo. I enjoyed that. And I think I mentioned it to you earlier, credit to Fabian Nicieza, who they offered the book to him first, and he was too busy and he recommended me. So
Right. But yeah, I mean, I just remember seeing this. The main reason why I remember this, because I had old individual issues, so I would see the ads for this from some of those issues, and it just stuck in my head ever since. I don't know why, but it just stuck in my head.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed working for, literally all the people I've been working with and for at Marvel were all people I knew, people I hung out with. Now, the editorial team at Malibu was new. They weren't people I knew. So they had new ideas. And it was a very interesting experience. It was lateral to what I had been used to doing.
Right. Oh, Spider-Man 2099. How was it? Because by this point you came on after Peter David had left. So how was that following up from him?
I don't think I wrote more than 1 or 2 issues of Spider-Man 2099, and I probably did it with Ben Rabb.
Right.
And it was really Ben's book, but Ben didn't have a lot of experience, so they teamed me with him to be able to help. To help him learn his craft, but Ben knew his craft very, very well, very, very quickly. So I probably participated in that less and less with each issue.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah, Ben Rabb scripting was Mike McCone on artwork.
Yep.
All right. Because I was
Ben's,
just yeah.
Ben's girlfriend at the time literally lived across the hall from my apartment. So he would be there and he would just come to my apartment and we would plot out the issues together. It was usually his idea. The seed of the story was usually his idea because in my mind, that was Ben's book. And I was just there to help sort of shepherd him a bit.
Well, you guys only did the 2 issues. It was just the 2 issues.
Yeah. So he would come and pitch the story and I'd be like, fine. And then I would just help him shape it, really. That's really what it was. Much more credit goes to Ben than me.
All right. Because from what I understand, that was around the point where 2099 was kind of winding down quite a bit from what I understand. Yeah. And so, and then of course you worked on X-Men. How was working on that title?
I loved working on X-Men. I loved working originally with Jay, and then who followed up? I think it was Glenn Greenberg.
Yeah,
they were the editors. I really enjoyed that title. He again was almost a blank slate. Almost. Oh, yeah. And John Ostrander had written it before me, and I believe what ended up happening. Don't quote me on this, but I guess I'll quote me. I think John had some stuff going on in his life and really was too busy. One of the issues he had plotted, he was too busy to script. So Jay, who had been my intern at one point, Jay was now the editor on that. He called me up and asked me if I could script that issue overnight. And I did. And then they asked me if I would come on the book. But I really liked that book because it was within the X-Men mythos, but he was a character who was not an X-Man and didn't really understand the idea of the X-Men. So I got to play with different tropes. I got to play with him as this sort of loner character who really didn't understand why he shouldn't use his powers in Washington Square Park when it almost started becoming a religion around him. And he was young and didn't understand, well, what's wrong with that? If I don't do anything bad.
Yeah, he's from the Age of Apocalypse timeline. So, of course, he's not going to realize, because that's the point where it's mostly been mutants, not the humanity. We're off in Europe.
Exactly. And he, to me, was an easily motivated character. In my mind, what his motivation all the time was, I'm not going to let this world become the Age of Apocalypse world that I left. And so he was a fun character. And he was almost an anti-hero. He wasn't, he did heroic things because he had the power to do them, but he wasn't out there patrolling the streets for crime, like Batman would be, or even Spider-Man. He didn't have a Cerebro to find mutants in trouble like the other X-Men. There was a sense that I was off in my own little corner, for good and bad, of the X-Men universe.
Yep. And then, of course, and that he's Cable, but he's pretty much Cable only in his genes. Nothing else was really Cable about him.
Exactly.
Especially without the convoluted backstory.
Yes. And I got to tell you, the Madeline Pryor stuff,
that
was not my idea. And that was
I was going to ask. I was about to ask for what I just saw over here. It's like, wait.
Super creepy to me.
Right here.
That was super creepy.
That's his mom. Because remember, Madeline was.
Don't want to discuss that. Don't want to discuss that.
I don't blame you. Let's just close it out.
Yep.
I just thought of so that was that editorial's idea?
I think that was already in play when I inherited the book, and it was probably editorial's way of staying within the X-Men universe. If I just created all new characters, then he would become more and more isolated and islanded from the X-Men. And nobody wanted that.
No.
But to me, I was having fun putting him up against the Abomination and people from other characters from other places.
In other words, you were making him more of a greater Marvel character than just an X-Men character.
That was my goal.
Yep. How was working on this, The Rise of Apocalypse, giving it pretty much its origin?
Loved it. Again, I loved working. It was Adam Pauline, I believe, the artist.
Yep.
Loved working with Adam. And then I think James Felder came on for the latter issues of the series. But that was a lot of fun. Apocalypse was such a cool character created by Walt and Weezy. And to be able to participate in their mythos making was, for me, I was a huge fan of both of them growing up. So that was a dream come true.
Did you look back at a lot of their stuff to figure it all out, or did you just come up with it all on your own, or a bit of both?
Well, I've read all of the Apocalypse appearances ever, and I don't necessarily have the greatest memory. And sometimes I had a memory of the gist of something more than the details of it. But it was easy to go back and check. Not as easy as it is now with the world.
Oh yeah, it's like it was actually having the pages right here in front of you, like this.
Exactly. And then there was editorial, and then there were people like Peter Sanderson who could tell you what happened on any given panel of any given page of any given issue.
Yeah, I've noticed there are a couple of people throughout Marvel history who were like that. You had Mark Waid, you had, of course,
Mark Gruenwald.
Exactly. I was about to say Gruenwald. Like the people who are, I understood Roger Stern was one of those, and Kurt Busiek were one of those. Who you just name in there, like, that's the issue. That's the issue.
Absolutely. And that was not me.
Right. I remember you told me that before we got started. Like, don't ask for specific. Like, I wouldn't, because I don't even know the specifics.
I don't even know the ones I have people bring me comics at conventions to sign, and I'll be like, I didn't write this, and they'll open to the credits page. I'm like, oh yeah,
yes,
I did.
Yep, I see. Yep.
That X-Men Unlimited, I really loved doing. The one
right here,
Franklin on the cover. No,
Franklin. This one.
Yeah.
Wasn't this a post onslaught?
Yes, it was.
I saw it.
It was. I really enjoyed that. I think it was Jim Chung was the and I loved his art. I loved
see how far he's gotten since then.
I loved working with him on Iron Man. I loved working with him on this title. It was fun to play with Franklin Richards a little. It just, his artwork, his storytelling is so solid. And you can see right there, I didn't have to use as many words as I might in other comics. He just covered everything with the pictures.
Now, when you were on the X-Men book, was that, I don't know the entire history of X-Men, so the Joseph stuff, was that already going on with Magneto when you were on? I just want to know from someone who worked at that point, what was going on with that Joseph stuff, that younger Magneto and all that?
That was a Scott Lobdell thing.
Of course.
And I remember there had been an issue where Magneto was reduced to a little baby Magneto in his costume. And I don't remember how Scott got him to the younger, long-haired Joseph, but I did do an issue of Unlimited, or besides this, another issue of Unlimited. I think it was Unlimited with Rogue and the two of them that I also really enjoyed doing.
Okay, they were around the point where they were trying to pair the two up.
Yes, I think they were, because she had been paired with Magneto at some point. Yeah. And my wife's from New Orleans, so I liked trying my hand at Southern drawls when writing her.
Oh, it's okay, sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I saw you worked on Gambit as well.
Gambit, yes, with Howard Mackey and Klaus Janson. And, Klaus is a good friend and a dream to work with. Again, my career, I got to work with new people who hadn't, especially on Marvel Comics Presents. When I was editing Marvel Comics Presents, I got to work with all kinds of new talent and all these people I had grown up respecting and admiring. So Marvel Comics Presents was it's a book that almost broke me, because it came out every 2 weeks and it had 4 stories in every issue. So I had 8 creative teams a month on that title. And I did 125 issues of it. And it really did almost break me. It's a big part of why I ended up leaving staff. But I loved it because I got to pair, like, Jim Lee was an up and coming artist. Right. And what happened was Don McGregor was writing the Black Panther serial for me. Panther's Rage. I don't remember. No, not Panther's Rage. Like Panther's Quest. Panther's Quest. He was doing that for Marvel Comics Presents with Gene Colan. And then there was one, they were all 8-page chapters or stories. And there was one chapter that Don desperately begged an extra page for. And I said, Don, I can't. All of my other stories are 8 pages. I don't have any 7-page story to do that. And so, he just begged me. And I love Don, and he's a great writer. And I was so happy to have been able to get him back working for Marvel on the Panther specifically. So he begged me, and I thought, Don's a very loquacious writer. He likes words, and he uses them very, very well and beautifully and evocatively. And so I thought, all right, Don's going to make my life a little difficult if I give him this extra page, because now I'm going to have to commission a 7-page story. And I had all these stories in the drawer way ahead of time because I was so scared of the biweekly schedule. I really never wanted to get caught with, with blank pages. So I said, all right, Don, the challenge is I will let you have the extra page on the Black Panther, but you have to write me a 7-page story, any character you want, but it's got to be a silent story. And I'm like, if he's going to make my life difficult, I'm going to make his a little difficult. But, Don being Don, he wrote it so clearly that I was able to assign that to this relative newcomer in the industry, Jim Lee. So my policy on that book was I would take established writers, put them with new artists, or new writers like Scott Lobdell and put them with established artists like Don Heck. That was my way of balancing that out. I knew where the new writer would falter, the experienced artist would be able to pick up the slack on that, and vice versa. Right. And that was so much fun for me.
Yep. So from what I just noticed here, there's a few other books they don't have on the site, like the Black Cat mini. How was it working on that?
A lot of fun. She's a great character, and it was
I love her.
Yeah, and it was being able to use Cardiac, which was Eric Larson's creation. I enjoyed that Black Panther.
Yeah, you don't see Cardiac anymore, I just realized.
No, you don't. And I think he's got such a great costume and great look. He should be used more often.
Yep. Although I know, sorry. Yeah.
And then I saw that you skimmed past some Speedball.
Oh, Speedball. Oh, I did. Oh, that was right here.
Yeah, I love that because that was working with Steve Ditko, and my heart just went pitter patter every time he came into the office.
Oh yeah. When was this done around?
Oh God, you're asking me dates. You promised.
Oh, sorry. You're right. Hold on. Let me check on. No, they don't have it on your wiki. Hold on.
I think if I remember correctly, Tom DeFalco created Speedball for the New Universe, but Jim Shooter rejected it from the New Universe because it was too much away from the world outside your window.
1988.
That makes sense. And then, Ditko was the perfect person for that book.
Yeah, and that's one of those characters he's always strongly tied to.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I do remember going to Tom and saying, really, are we going to go with this name Speedball, which to my knowledge on the street was a combination of cocaine and heroin?
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? Is that the way to go? And Tom was like, nobody's going to make that connection. I'm like, Tom, it was the first thing I thought of. I'd never done heroin, but that was the first thing I thought of in my life, when I heard it. But it was a good name, and he went with it. And
I think the subtitle helped, the Mass Marvel. I think that helped.
Yes, and that firmly placed it in Ditko's realm.
Yep.
That really did.
I gotta say, just hearing the stuff I've heard about Ditko, may he rest in peace, and hearing how he almost came back to Marvel again, if it wasn't for Kurt Busiek doing Untold Tales, it's like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently he was going to come back, but when he heard how Busiek was doing stuff in between his issues of Spider-Man, he left. He left. He got pissed. He got ticked off at that. It's like he felt that Kurt was meddling with his stuff.
Ditko, Steve was very serious about what he did. He was very serious, and that was.
I love what Kurt did.
Yeah, so did I. But Steve, he took comic books more seriously than most people I know.
Right. Really so I can understand why he was like, it's like, yeah, it feels like you're tampering.
Yes.
Yeah. So now, of course, from what I've read on Wiki, this was your last Marvel book. Was this one?
I believe it was.
Yep. How was working on this one? Like, what led to this project? I saw the other minis and everything.
Well, Bobby Chase asked me to do it. She was the editor, and we were good friends. We had both started at Marvel within weeks of each other, I think, or at least officially. And we both got promoted to full editors on the same day. Bob Harris, Howard Mackey, we were a tight group. We were a lunch group a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So when Bobby asked me to do it, I would have done anything Bobby asked me to do. And of course, that was my chance to, like, I enjoyed working with Franklin Richards on that other X-Men Unlimited. This was a chance to work with other of the Fantastic Four characters. So I enjoyed doing it. It took a different direction than even I planned at the beginning. It had a little bit more of a supernatural edge to it than you would expect from Fantastic Four characters. But that was the fun for me. I did that intentionally, really. That was not my intention when I first took the project on. But then when I sat down to think about, well, what story are we going to tell? I'm like, let's tell something a little out of the science fiction realm that the Fantastic Four is used to traveling in.
Yep. And I also remember you worked, since going back to the Clone Saga, you worked on this one, which was basically, well, what if, I remember it was what if Ben had taken over?
Yep.
So this was kind of going back to what you originally were talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, interesting idea and everything. And this, I know, was wired at the point, it was before Mayday, the Spider-Girl issue one, but it was still around that point of where they were doing some weird experimentation with what ifs, I noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were publishing a lot of titles in the 90s.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of experimenting. There were hits and there were misses. There's no question about that.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so yeah, this was an interesting story. I mean, I know a lot of what ifs have bittersweet endings, but this one felt more like it kind of made sense. And it wasn't as bittersweet as other endings where it's like, oh, they all died.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so what eventually led to you leaving Marvel?
Well, so I left staff eventually. Mm-hmm. It was a combination. The reasons I left, I really was burnt out by Marvel Comics Presents and Excalibur, which was really one of my pet titles that I was editing.
Oh, yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Because I had gotten to work with Chris Claremont on that and Alan Davis, and then Alan Davis doing his first writing, I think, for American Comics. And Alan and I are super close.
I met him once. I didn't meet him once. Great guy.
Oh, he's a terrific guy. Terrific guy. So anyway, Tom DeFalco moved the Excalibur title over into the X-Men office with Bob Harris, which I understood the logic behind, but
oh yeah,
I was really sort of asking for him to reassign Marvel Comics Presents to someone else at that point. And then he did that, and it was not deliberate that he was trying to take a shot at me or anything, but he was rearranging the books the way it made the most sense for the books, which was fine. And honestly, I had issues with editing Excalibur, because those characters were still considered X-Men characters, so they were Bob Harris characters. So I had to run a lot of those storylines and character elements that we wanted to do with, at least with Kitty and Nightcrawler and Phoenix, through the X-Men office. And it was the same, and that was on a monthly basis. That was something I went through that was almost hellish with Weapon X on Marvel Comics Presents. Again, no diss at Bob Harris. His job was to protect Wolverine. And suddenly we were basically doing Wolverine's origin. I always looked at it as the origin of the implanting of not his origin, but the origin of the implanting of the adamantium into him. But
you're talking about the Weapon X story.
Right. And I had to run every panel, every line of dialogue through.
Ooh.
And there was an issue, and Bob and I were very good friends, so he didn't want to make my life difficult, but he had a job which was to protect and shepherd the X-Men and Wolverine specifically in this case. And the other issue that happened with Weapon X was, I remember Tom DeFalco calling me into, so we would have to show pages for the solicits to the marketing and sales department, and they were coming in from Barry on Weapon X. And I remember Tom calling me down to his office, and I went there, and Carol Kalish, who was the head of marketing or sales at that point, was there and declared that it was so good, the Weapon X, that instead it was going to be printed as a hardcover book instead of going in Marvel Comics Presents, a hardcover book with better quality coloring and better quality paper, etc. And I fought for it a little bit. I said, no, Barry's writing this in 8-page chapters and it's for this book and he wants to be in this book. And I lost that battle at first. And what happened was shortly before that, a few months before that, we had experimented with other lead features in Marvel Comics Presents, Cyclops, Colossus, etc. I think Nightcrawler at some point.
Right.
But the sales were always better with Wolverine as a lead feature. So Tom had mandated to me that Wolverine had to be the lead feature moving forward. Cut to a few months later, we're doing Weapon X as the lead feature. And now I'm being told it has to go into this other format instead of going to Marvel Comics Presents. So like I said, I argued against it. I lost. I went back to my office. I sat there for about 5 minutes stewing and even thinking about how am I going to tell Barry this? It's not, anyway, I went back to Tom's office and Carol was gone at that point. And I knocked on his door and I went in. I said, Tom, I just want to get one thing straight. So the mandate for Marvel Comics Presents that you've given me is it always has to be a Wolverine lead feature. But if it's any good, it has to go in some other format. So the mandate is I have to print crappy Wolverine stories as the lead feature every issue of Marvel Comics Presents. And he just stared at me for a minute and I moved away from the window because I thought I'm a little from the window right now for this conversation. And he just really stared at me and he said, sit down. And in my memory, he says this isn't true. In my memory, I sat right down on the floor because he scared me when he barked it.
This was Angry Tom, the infamous Angry Tom that you guys spoofed. It was
and Tom and I fought a lot. We're very good friends now, but we fought a lot and very loudly. But all credit to Tom, he would listen. He was Italian, I was Irish. We were used to yelling, but he would listen and he could change his mind about things, and that happened very often. I can't say that happened as much with Jim Shooter. Jim did not change his mind as much. But Tom said, sit down. He says I sat on the couch. So let's go with that version of the story. He called Carol Kalish back to the office and he said, Carol, we're going to print this in Marvel Comics Presents first, and then we'll do it as a hardcover and Barry can recolor it and on better paper if he wants. And I really appreciated that. He stood up for me against the marketing department. He stood up for my book, my title that I was in charge of, Marvel Comics Presents.
Because he realized what you were saying. He realized you were basically saying, you're giving me the junk.
Yes, exactly. You're telling me I have to do Wolverine, but if I do good Wolverine, it goes to another format. So, okay, I just need to know. I have to commission crappy Wolverine stories from crappy creators for the lead feature. And he heard that and he realized, oh, that's true. That's the position I put Terry in. So I'm going to undo that. And I really appreciated it.
Yeah, but I know then you had Sam Keith on a good number of issues, like right after the Weapon X issue. I'm looking on the wiki, the Marvel wiki. But
I did, and I'll tell you how that came about. I had originally commissioned Peter David and Todd McFarlane to do an 8-part Wolverine series. And Peter had written, I believe, the first 2 chapters. And if my memory's correct, Todd had the first chapter, but hadn't sent in any art yet. And then he actually showed up at my office, even though he lived in the Midwest. And he showed up in my office and said, look, I hate to do this. I've never really done this before, but I have some personal stuff going on and I have to give this series back to you. I won't be able to do it. So I was left sort of hanging. And it wasn't quite last minute because, like I said, I was so scared of this biweekly schedule. I tried to stay way, way, way ahead of it. But I was left sort of hanging, and I had seen the Sam Keith stuff that he had done for Bobby Chase's office for an issue of Hulk. It might have been a fill-in issue. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I got the Peter David Hulk omnibuses, all of them.
Yeah. And I just loved what he had done. I thought that is so different. I would love to have him. At first, I think I commissioned him to do a cover, and I said, let's see how his Wolverine turns out, because I was using different people on the covers most of the time at that point, not necessarily the people that were doing the lead features. But I loved what he did. In fact, I have one of those covers, those Marvel Comics Presents Ghost Rider covers of his.
I saw that when I was flipping through all of them. Let me find which one it is.
I had that hanging on my wall in my apartment in New York. He gave me the original art for that, which I really appreciate.
Let me find it. Hold on. Let me find it. It's somewhere here.
Ghost Rider being nibbled at by a bunch of little demon type things.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I did see that. So hold on. Where is it? Was it it was in the, I think it was in the 90s.
That makes sense.
Yeah, where is it?
Those look like Steve Lytle covers, even from the top.
Oh, that's a great cover, first of all. Keith Howard. Hold on. Where is it? Where is it? It's trying to find all these on here because it's just like flip it through.
By that point, it was a flip book, and it was
not 100, not that one. That was the one I saw. Felt like Ghost Rider's taking over for Wolverine.
Yeah. And we were doing a flip book with Wolverine being the cover feature on one side and Ghost Rider on the other.
Right. I'm trying.
There were a few moments with Sam that I like to talk about, and I hope he's okay with me saying this, but that he was very young at the time, and I do remember. I love Sam, but I do remember once him sending me in a. Okay, actually, I'll tell you about the first chapter of the Wolverine Peter David series. It was Wolverine out doing his hunting of a deer where he just would touch the deer and not kill the deer kind of thing, and practicing. And it was one of those things. And Sam was supposed to send me in, layouts and then pencils. You're seeing some of it there. Yep. Yes. And so what he did was he sent me in the first 8-page chapter completely penciled and inked. And Wolverine was completely naked throughout it. Full frontal and rear nudity.
Oh, like right here, for example.
Everywhere. He had to redraw entire panels after this. And I called him up and I'm like, Sam, what are you doing? We can't print this. These are comic books. We want kids to be able to read them as well as adults. And he said to me, I'll never forget this. He said, well, nowhere in the plot did it say that Wolverine wasn't naked. And I'm like, well, okay, you're right. It did not say that.
But that goes against what you just said. That goes against the whole point.
And I said, but Sam, nowhere in the plot did it say Wolverine is not wearing a bowling ball on his head. But you had the good sense to not put a bowling ball on his head. So I just thought it was a given that Wolverine wouldn't be full frontal and rear nudity. And he said, fine, send the pages back to me. And
he kept him naked, but at least did better angles.
Well, first he sent it back to me, and he had added like foliage in front of some of the frontal nudity and that kind of stuff. But for the rear nudity, he just added more hair to Wolverine's butt and sent it back. And I called him up again. And I'm like, nope. Wolverine's hairy butt is still Wolverine's butt. And
this originally was going to be full ass, not side ass.
Yes. Oh, there were panels he had to completely redraw because I didn't want him just adding foliage to stuff that would ruin the design of the panel.
Here that works. Here that works at the angle.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, there that works because the angle. It's perfect angle of him just looking over. It's like you can't have it any other way.
I think between this and the Weapon X storyline, I'm probably responsible for more naked Wolverine in comic books than any other editor. And there were even issues. There was at least one panel in Weapon X where, Tom DeFalco told me we had to change it because, Wolverine was naked in all these vats with bubbles all around, but this was a side view of his thigh. And I'll never forget, I had to call up Barry and said, Tom wants us to add more bubbles to or whatever he wanted done, or to redraw this panel. And Barry came into the office, which he didn't do often. And he came in to have the argument with Tom in person. And we went in there, and I remember stepping back while this argument was going on, thinking, I don't need to be involved in this because they are literally arguing over Wolverine, and they were arguing over Wolverine's naked thigh, whether that was too sexy. And I remember, Barry saying, well, you might think Wolverine's naked, hairy thigh is sexy, but that's on you, Tom. And Tom said, no, I'm like, I'm out of this conversation. I'll let them fight it out. And eventually there was a compromise reached. I think more bubbles were added to the naked thigh.
How was it working also with Bob Blake on the Hercules stuff?
Oh, it was fine.
Yeah, I love that. I got the hardcovers for those. So the moment you were mentioning how you were doing these, I'm like, oh, I got to bring this up.
Yeah. No, I love Bob's work, and I love the character of Hercules. And if I remember correctly, that was sort of either a lead-in or a support for one of the limited series he was doing.
Yeah, it was. I think Hercules. This one was right after. This was after his. Okay, you had the two mini. No, this was a postscript to his graphic novel.
Okay, that's what it was.
Yeah, you had the two minis, then you had the graphic novel, then you had these.
Yeah, I was able to.
Yeah.
With Marvel Comics Presents, I was able to support new titles that were coming out, like Speedball. I could do a Speedball story in there. And then people who maybe wouldn't have picked up Speedball on the stands, but they read any Wolverine story that came out, would buy it for Wolverine. They'd read an 8-page Speedball story and then maybe be curious about checking that out. I think we did it with Nth Man. I know we did it with a bunch of titles that were about to come out. We sort of did little 8-page prequels for people.
Yep. And what issue did you leave Marvel Comic Presents around?
125 was my last issue.
125. I had a feeling that's what it was. So
5 years. That was 5 years of the title.
Whoo, that. And you ended on a Wolverine story.
Yeah.
Yep. With Scott Lobdell and everything. So yeah, but yeah, your time, like I said, your time at Marvel has just been, especially, I mean, you were on there in the 80s, but your stuff in the 90s is what I think a lot of people recognize you for as well as a writer.
Yes, that's true. Because when I left staff, I then became a contracted writer for a while. And you asked, I'm sorry, I strayed. You asked what made me leave Marvel. I left staff because I was sort of burnt out. I was writing and editing at the same time.
That was funny how we deviated. I was like, how do we get over here? I wanted to hear.
I enjoyed editing a lot, but you know, you go into the office, even though we were exempt employees, we didn't have to keep set hours. If you could work 2 hours a day and get all your books out and never miss shipping, that was fine. But if you had to work 20 hours a day, then you did that and there was no overtime. That's what we're exempt employees. So I left staff to focus more on the writing. And then what happened was I was an only child, and both my parents, who divorced when I was young, I lived in Manhattan, my dad lived in the Bronx, my mom lived in Queens. Both of them were diagnosed with cancer apart from each other. So I was spending more time every day either going to Queens and taking my mom to doctors or going to the Bronx, taking my dad. I had 2 kids by that point. So
basically life got in the way, in other words.
Well, life got in the way. So I was taking on less and less work. I probably even missed a few deadlines. I'm not sure. I don't really remember getting fired off of any titles, but you know, some titles just ended. Moon Knight I was writing and that title ended. And I didn't look for another title, etc. And so the editors are now working with different new writers, and there's a new crop of people coming up, and I was offered less and less work as I had less and less time available.
So it was you were suffered the whole transitioning type of going from the old guard to the new guard, like some creators have.
It was really by attrition more than anything else. So
understandable, but would you ever want to offer? Would you ever come back, or would you think that
Of course I would. In fact, Howard Mackey and I did a project for Marvel for Disney Plus called the Hero Project. It was on Disney Plus for a while, and part of it was they took kids that had done good things for their community and they rewarded them with a check for whatever project they were working on.
I remember that.
Yeah, a cool leather jacket with like a Marvel Hero Project embroidered onto it, and then 4-page comics about them. So Howard and I worked on those with Ralph Macchio. Ralph, I think, did most of the, if not all of the writing, and Howard and I did the editing and story shaping for that. So I have worked with Marvel since then. I worked with Zenescope as an editor writer for a few years. And now Howard Mackey and I have a company called Inksmith, INKSMYTH, Inks and Myth, where we do custom comics as high-end gifts for people.
This right here.
That's it. Yep.
That's pretty awesome, actually. That is pretty awesome.
Now, those two, there's 2 Bill Sienkiewicz covers you can see there.
Oh, yeah, I definitely see them.
Krasinski and the one of Superman.
Yep. And I gotta say, this kind of thing almost reminds me of when Marvel did the custom comics, like, like the put yourself in a comic with you'll be Captain Universe.
Yes, exactly.
I remember that, and they would you would put in, if I remember, you would send money in, send a photo, and then they would draw you into a standard story in that regard. But
yeah, I don't really remember how that worked. I don't think I worked on any of those.
Right.
But this company, this is a lot of fun because what we do is so normally it's a gift, and so the person commissioning the comic is not the same as the subject of the story. So, and it's usually done as a surprise. So the person, we'll interview the person commissioning it and saying, let's say you wanted to do one for a friend of yours. We would ask, well, what are his strengths? What do you view as his heroic quality or his strengths? We would turn those into heroic superhero qualities,
Nice.
superhero identity. We would ask what obstacles he's overcome in his life, and we would turn that into whatever conflict or villain. It's not biographical, but it's a fantastical version of things that are true. And then we pepper in Easter eggs of, their childhood dog or their high school name or whatever throughout there. We'll pepper in those Easter eggs. So,
never mind. I can't go to that.
Well, you should be able to. I don't know why you.
It said enter password.
Guess yeah. Well, we don't want people to see all these.
I know. I figured as much. That's why I'm like, oh wait, I understand why.
Yeah. So it's interesting, and what we found that's also interesting that we didn't expect going into this is usually the person commissioning the comic really enjoys the process and the opportunity to tell stories about themselves or their friend or their relative or whoever they're doing it for that they haven't been able to tell for a while. And then they'll get on, like that Superman-y comic was done by a brother and sister. And they would get on the phone and tell us stories about their mom that they hadn't had opportunities to tell in a while. And they really enjoyed the process as much as the person who would receive the comic.
Boy, that is a great idea. That is just a brilliant idea.
It's a lot of fun.
It's right. No one's done it before.
It's a lot of fun. Well, we're a sort of high ticket item because we're using, Bill Sienkiewicz, Howard Mackey is the head writer. So you can certainly get these comic books done for less than we're charging.
Right.
But we're bringing the Rolodex and the experience and the
exactly. That makes sense. That makes complete sense. It's kind of like I remember when Kurt Busiek was on Iron Man, he once had to be where he opened up his Stark, where he will help provide, anything you need. Like if you need help with your company, all stuff. But he's like, but I don't come cheap. I will the quality, but the price will be as good as my work.
Exactly.
And I was like, and that's exactly what it's like. It's like, Stark Solutions is what he called it.
Yeah.
And basically, and I like that idea. It's like, So, but what is your take on what's been going on with comics lately? I mean, I asked you this at the convention, but I'd like to talk to you about it here. Like, do you think comics are kind of getting off the rail? Do you think they're doing good? Do you think they're stagnating? Or what's your opinion on current comics from your observation as
I would hate to say they're getting off the rail or stagnating. I think any medium has to evolve. And there are even business aspects to how the comic book medium has evolved. Like comic books, we used to, when I was on staff, cancel any title that sold less than 100,000 copies a month.
Nowadays, that's a great seller.
Oh, I think it's a rare comic. I think X-Men probably sells 30,000 copies a month.
Yeah.
But all these comics are now being written towards the trade paperback, with the idea being that's where they're going to get their sales. Those trade paperbacks in Barnes and Noble, in whatever other bookstores out there, Amazon, etc., more than the individual.
Not like this.
Exactly. More than the individual comics. That's what I miss about comics. When we were doing them way back when, we were trying to do full stories. There would be a cliffhanger at the end to bring you back the next issue. But even if it was a 3-issue story arc, we were trying to give people the full meat of a story in any given 22 pages. Now it feels like, the first issue of a story arc might just be what we would have done in the first 4 pages of a comic. It's sort of decompressed, and it's I don't know. I don't feel like I'm getting my money's worth from an individual issue. I probably would feel I'm getting my money's worth from that trade paperback when it's done. And
Mhm.
and I love some of the writers and artists out there.
Oh, yeah, I agree. There
And
is
I
some I have issues with, but most of them are great writers.
exactly. They know what they're doing, and it's a different industry now than it had been then. And you're competing. Comic books are competing
Exactly.
with different things. They're competing with video games. They're competing with 8,000 channels or
Exactly.
streaming movies. Yeah, and the video games, I would say the biggest of all, which are basically comic books, but they're interactive.
Oh,
So
yeah, look at the Spider-Man game. Look at that Spider-Man game.
exactly.
Great game. A phenomenal game. It did stuff that I still wish we would see in the comics with Spidey.
Yep.
Oh, boy. Spidey currently. Oh, boy.
Look, I still read comic books. I'm
Mhm.
going to be a comic book fan my entire life.
Right.
Many people feel I'm too old to be buying comic books, but that doesn't stop me.
Who cares?
Yeah, I don't care at all. My kids are two of the people who probably feel I'm too old to be reading comics, but
Mhm.
too bad. My 27-year-old son is still playing video games. So
Exactly. Hey, I'm 38. I'm 38, and I'm still playing video games and reading comics.
Yep. So I think it's a wonderful medium. I hope
Mhm.
it never does go away.
Agreed.
And it evolves into what it has to evolve into. And the talent tells stories in a different way. You know, storytelling is storytelling. I do
Exactly.
believe that. I think you have to motivate a character well. There's really three types of story, and it's person versus person, person versus nature, or person versus self. Those are
Yep.
the three stories you can tell out there.
That's a good way of putting it. That is a very good way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's Superman versus Lex Luthor, or Superman versus a volcano, or it's Superman versus his own inner conflicts, which are
Yep.
the best stories of all. The most.
Oh, definitely. Oh, All-Star Superman.
Yep, exactly. Yep, great example.
Exactly. Well, Terry, thank you so much for coming on. It was great having you on. I got to start winding down. I got to get back to work. So,
Yeah, I'm gonna pretend I'm getting back to work too.
but again, no, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on. Maybe next time, if you ever hear from Howard, we could have both of you on.
I will pressure him.
Yeah, I would, because I would love to have. He's a guy I've adored. His Ghost Rider and his time on Spider-Man has been like he's had one of the longest tenures after him. David Michelini. Yeah.
He's super talented, and we play well off each other. I'm the brains and the looks, and he's the brawn.
Yep. So yeah, but again, no, thank you so much for giving so much of your insight. I'm pretty sure this was an interesting trek down memory lane for you, I bet.
It was. It always is.
Yep. But yeah, just thank you so much, and thank you all of you for sticking around, and we'll see you all on the next one.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.